What happens when a woman with nothing to lose meets a man who has forgotten how to love? Emily arrived in Texas with nothing but a worn suitcase and secret hopes. Cole Maddox was waiting for her on his porch, tall, cold, and unshakable. He needed a wife. She, a home. But as the summer heat simmered over the wheat fields, something dangerous began to stir between them. What neither of them knew was that some desires can't be denied forever. If this story has sparked your curiosity, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. The late afternoon sun hung heavy over the Texas plains, painting the endless wheat fields in shades of amber and gold. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as the wagon wheels carved their path along the dirt road, each turn bringing Emily closer to a future she could hardly imagine. The hot, dry wind whipped her red hair, carrying the scent of earth and something wild, something that spoke of vast open spaces and men who lived by their own rules. Emily pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather of her lone suitcase, the weight of everything she owned reduced to this single modest bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the wagon rounded the final curve, and there it was, the Maddox farm. The house loomed before her like something out of a frontier dream, a grand structure of dark, weathered wood that had been kissed by decades of Texas sun and storms. The front porch stretched wide and inviting, adorned with carved railings and an old swing that creaked gently in the afternoon breeze. But it wasn't the house that made her breath catch in her throat. It was the man standing on that porch. Cole Maddox leaned against the wooden post with the casual confidence of someone who owned everything the eye could see. Tall, with broad shoulders, he filled his white cotton shirt in a way that made her wonder what kind of strength resided beneath the fabric. His dark hair caught the golden light, and his cowboy hat sat at just the right angle to cast shadows across features that were both rugged and aristocratic. Everything about him spoke of power held in careful check, of a man who commanded respect without ever having to ask for it. The wagon came to a final jolt, kicking up another cloud of dust that sparkled in the fading light. Emily waited, her hands folded in her lap, hoping he would step forward, offer his hand, show some small courtesy to ease this awkward beginning. Instead, Cole remained perfectly still, his grey eyes studying her with the same cold assessment he might give a piece of cattle he was considering buying. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the snorting of the horses and the distant call of a mockingbird. Emily felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not from the Texas sun, but from something much more complicated. There was an intensity in that gaze that made her skin tingle, her pulse race, even as his obvious indifference pricked her pride. Finally, she gathered her skirts and climbed down from the wagon alone, her boots hitting the dusty ground with silent determination. She smoothed the blue travel dress and lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Maddox," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He straightened slowly, pushing himself off the post with deliberate ease. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough like aged whiskey in oak barrels. "So you're Emily?" It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with all the warmth of a business transaction. No "Miss Emily" or "Welcome to Texas," or even a simple "How was your trip?" Just those 4 words, spoken as if he were ticking something off a list. Emily felt something stir in her chest, part disappointment, part challenge. She had expected coldness, prepared herself for a man who saw her as nothing more than a practical solution to a practical problem. But she hadn't expected this magnetic pull she felt toward him, this awareness that seemed to crackle in the air between them like heat lightning before a storm. "I am," she replied, keeping her voice level, "and you're exactly as I imagined." Something flickered in his grey eyes at that. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. It vanished so quickly she could have imagined it, but for just a moment his carefully controlled mask had slipped. The wagon driver cleared his throat awkwardly. "The lady's trunk?" Cole nodded toward the house. "Porch," he said curtly, then turned his attention back to Emily. "Are you hungry?" The mundane question sounded strangely intimate in the charged atmosphere between them. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She watched as he moved with fluid grace to help the driver with her trunk, his movements economical and precise. There was something almost predatory in the way he moved, like a wolf in gentleman's clothing. As they walked toward the house together, Emily became sharply aware of everything about him, the way his long legs ate up the ground, the width of his shoulders blocking out part of the setting sun, the faint scent of leather and something uniquely masculine that made her mouth go dry. He didn't offer his arm or make small talk. He simply walked beside her in silence, his presence both protective and somehow dangerous. "The house is beautiful," she ventured, as they climbed the porch steps. "It's functional," he replied, pushing open the heavy wooden door. But as Emily stepped over the threshold of what would be her new home, she couldn't shake the feeling that Cole Maddox was anything but functional. He was a mystery wrapped in controlled power, a man who observed everything and revealed nothing. And despite all the red flags in her mind, despite the clear message in his cold grey eyes that this was business and nothing more, she found herself wondering what it would take to make that careful control slip completely. The door closed softly behind them, sealing them together in the deepening twilight, and Emily realized that her new life was about to begin, whether they were ready for it or not. The inside of the house enveloped Emily like a strong masculine embrace. The scent of old wood lingered in every corner, mixed with the persistent aroma of strong coffee that seemed to have seeped into the very walls over the years. It was the kind of fragrance that spoke of solitary mornings, a man who drank his coffee in silence while planning the day that stretched out before him across endless fields. Emily let her eyes roam the space, taking in every detail of this house that was now hers. The main room was spacious but stripped down, dominated by rustic dark wood furniture that looked as though it had been carved by the very hands that worked the land. A worn leather couch occupied the center of the room, flanked by a simple coffee table and 2 armchairs that had seen decades of use. The bare walls were dotted only with a few framed photographs, arid Texas landscapes, and what appeared to be black and white family portraits, serious faces staring back at her with the same reserved intensity as Cole. It was unmistakably the home of a single man, a functional space where every object had its purpose, and nothing existed purely for beauty. There were no flowers, no delicate curtains, no little feminine touches that transformed a house into a home. It was practical, solid, and a bit melancholy, exactly like the man who had brought her here. Cole closed the door behind them and walked to the center of the room, his steps echoing on the wooden floor with silent authority. He removed his hat and placed it on the table, fully revealing his face for the first time. Emily felt her breath falter again. Without the shadow of the hat, she could see the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell over his forehead, and most of all, the full intensity of those grey eyes that seemed capable of reading her most intimate thoughts. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the couch with an economical motion. Emily remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. There was something in the way he had said it, not exactly rude, but definitely an order disguised as an invitation. "I prefer to stand, thank you," she replied. He raised an eyebrow, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of approval in his eyes, as if her refusal to submit immediately had sparked something in him, perhaps even respect. "As you wish." Cole crossed his arms over his chest, a stance that made his muscles stand out beneath his cotton shirt. "Let's clear a few things up from the start." His tone had changed, becoming more formal, more distant. It was the tone of a man about to lay down the terms of a business contract, and Emily felt something sink in her stomach. She had prepared for this, knew that this marriage was a matter of convenience, but hearing the words out loud would be different. "I'm listening," she said, lifting her chin with determination. Cole studied her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face as though memorizing every detail. "Don't get any expectations beyond what we've agreed on. I need a wife to keep this house running, someone to take care of the domestic tasks and eventually to have children who can inherit this land." Each word dropped between them, like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of reality that Emily felt in every fiber of her being. She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her composure. "And I need a home and security," she replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "I understand the terms of our agreement." "Good." Cole nodded, but his eyes didn't leave her face. This house worked perfectly well without a woman for years. I don't expect that to change drastically. You'll have your responsibilities, I'll have mine. We'll keep things practical. The word practical sounded almost like a warning, as though he was reminding both of them that romance wasn't part of the deal. But Emily couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered on her lips as he spoke, or how his breath seemed a little deeper when she came closer. "And what about sleeping arrangements?" she asked, feeling the heat rise in her neck. Something darkened in Cole's gaze, a shadow that passed so quickly she almost missed it. "You'll have the master bedroom. I use the office at the end of the hall when I need to sleep here at the house." When I need to sleep here at the house. The words revealed more than he probably intended. He was a man who often slept under the stars, who preferred the solitude of the fields to the intimacy of a heated bed. Emily imagined him lying under the vast Texas sky, alone with his thoughts and whatever past had made him so determined to keep his distance. "That won't be permanent, will it?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Emily felt her face burn with embarrassment. Cole became very still, so still she could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant mooing of cattle in the fields. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerously controlled. "That depends on a lot of things that still need to be determined." The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken meanings and possibilities neither of them dared name. Emily felt like she was walking on the edge of a cliff where one wrong step could change everything between them. "I understand," she murmured, though she wasn't sure she understood anything about this complex man who was now her husband. Cole turned to the window, his back to her, as he gazed out at the fields stretching to the horizon. "Dinner will be at 6. Rosa, our cook, will have everything ready before she leaves. You can familiarize yourself with the house until then." It was a dismissal, polite but definitive. Emily nodded, knowing he couldn't see her. "Very well." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Emily." Her name on his lips sounded different, less formal, more intimate. She turned, her heart racing. "Welcome to Texas," he said, and for just a moment his voice lost that careful hardness. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to send a wave of warmth through Emily's chest. As she climbed the stairs toward what would be her new room, she couldn't shake the way he had said her name, or how his eyes had softened for just an instant. Maybe there was more to Cole Maddox than he was willing to show. And maybe, just maybe, the rules he had set so carefully were meant to be broken. At 6 o'clock sharp, Emily descended the stairs in a simple light green cotton dress that highlighted the color of her eyes. She had spent the last hour exploring the room that was now hers, a spacious, masculine space with a sturdy double bed, a wooden desk, and a window that offered a view of the endless fields. She had tried not to think about the fact that Cole had slept in that bed, that his presence was still imbued in the sheets that would now be hers. The sound of her footsteps on the wooden floor echoed through the quiet house, announcing her arrival. Cole was already seated at the dining table, a solid oak piece that could easily accommodate 8 people, but now seemed enormous and intimidating with only 2 places set at opposite ends. He had changed out of his work shirt into a clean, crisp white cotton one, contrasting with his sun-kissed Texas skin. His damp hair suggested he had showered, and Emily caught the clean scent of soap and something subtly masculine that made her stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. "Good evening," she said, hesitating at the entrance to the room. Cole lifted his eyes from his plate and simply nodded, an economical gesture that served both as a greeting and an indication for her to sit down. There was no comment about her appearance, no polite compliment, not even a recognition that she had made herself presentable for dinner. It was as if she were a ghost floating through his house. Emily took her seat in the chair clearly meant for her, feeling the weight of the silence grow between them like a living entity. The table was set with military precision, simple but good quality plates, silver cutlery that had seen decades of use, and a golden cornbread that still exhaled steam in the center, accompanied by a stew that smelled of meat and spices. The first sound was the metallic clink of cutlery against porcelain. Cole ate with deliberate, controlled movements, cutting the meat into precise pieces, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on his plate as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Occasionally, He would glance up to grab the bread or reach for the salt, but his eyes never met hers. Emily tried to focus on the food, and it was delicious, perfectly seasoned and comforting after the long day of travel. But each bite seemed amplified in the silence, each movement of her cutlery sounding too loud in her ears. She was painfully aware of every little sound she made, from the whisper of her skirt against the chair to the soft breath she was trying to keep controlled. "The food is excellent," she ventured after a few minutes that felt like hours. "Rosa is a very talented cook." "Yes," came Cole's monosyllabic reply, without looking up. Emily bit her lower lip, feeling a mix of frustration and something dangerously close to sadness. She had expected coldness, but this was almost cruel, like she was completely invisible to him. "How long has she worked here?" 10 years. Another short answer, delivered in the same neutral tone. "She must know this land almost as well as you do." Cole chewed slowly before responding. "She takes care of the house. I take care of the land." The message was clear. Each had their place, their responsibilities clearly defined. There was no room for casual conversation or domestic intimacy. Emily felt something tighten in her chest, not exactly hurt, but a growing understanding of how lonely her new life might be. The crackling of the fire filled the silence that followed, a comforting sound that at least gave the illusion of human warmth in the room. Emily found herself studying Cole's profile as he ate, examining the strong line of his jaw, the way his lips moved as he chewed, the way a rebellious lock of hair fell across his forehead. There was an unexpected elegance in his movements, despite the obvious brutality of his hands. Hands that knew hard work, that had shaped this land and everything that grew on it. Emily imagined those hands touching her with the same controlled precision they used to hold the cutlery, and felt warmth spread through her body in a way that made her shift uncomfortably in her chair. As though he had felt her gaze, Cole finally lifted his eyes and met hers directly. For a moment that lasted an eternity, they simply stared at each other across the table, and Emily saw something flare in those grey depths. Something that had nothing to do with indifference. Then he blinked and the moment broke like glass. "I need to check the cattle after dinner," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "You can familiarize yourself more with the house." "Sure," Emily murmured, though the last thing she wanted was more time alone in this silent house. Cole finished his meal in silence, folded his napkin with precision, and stood up. "Good night, Emily." Again, the way he said her name made something tremble inside her. There was an involuntary intimacy in the word, as if it had a taste on his tongue. "Good night, Cole." She watched him leave, noticing how he moved with fluid grace despite his height, how his shoulders filled the doorway. Only when she heard his footsteps fade did she realize she had been holding her breath. Emily remained seated at the empty table, surrounded by the echoes of a conversation that had never truly happened, and the ghostly presence of a man who refused to let her in. But there was something in the way he had looked at her in that fleeting moment, something hungry and dangerous that suggested his careful indifference was exactly that. Careful. Deliberate. A wall built not to keep her out, but to keep something locked inside him. And Emily began to suspect that whatever that something was, it was becoming harder and harder to contain. When she finally stood up to clear the table, her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from an anticipation she couldn't name. This silent war between them had only just begun, and she had the strange feeling that the next battle would be fought on much more dangerous ground. 2 hours past midnight, Emily gave up pretending she could sleep. The room was too quiet, the bed too large, and her thoughts too turbulent to allow for any chance of rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cole sitting at that table, the way his fingers held the cutlery, the fleeting moment their gazes met, and something electric passed between them. Sighing, she pulled back the covers and rose, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The simple white cotton nightgown she wore was practical yet feminine, with tiny mother-of-pearl buttons running from her neck to her knees, and sleeves that ended in delicate lace cuffs. It was modest, but in a subtle, tempting way that highlighted her femininity. Emily picked up one of the books she had brought in her luggage, Jane Eyre, a story she knew by heart, but that always comforted her. Perhaps the familiar words would calm her restless mind. She decided to head to the living room. Staying cooped up in the bedroom only made her anxiety grow. The house was wrapped in deep silence as she descended the stairs, each step creaking softly under her feet. The silvery light from the full moon filtered through the windows, casting ghostly patterns on the walls and transforming the familiar room into something almost magical. Emily lit a thick candle she found on the mantel, and the dancing flame immediately filled the room with a golden, welcoming light. She settled on the leather couch, curling her legs under her body and pulling a light blanket over her shoulders. The nightgown slid slightly, revealing the delicate curve of her shoulders and the pale skin that seemed to glow in the candlelight. Her red hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder, creating a striking contrast against the white fabric. Emily opened the book to one of her favorite passages and began to read aloud, her soft voice echoing through the quiet room. She had always found comfort in hearing her own voice recite the words, as though telling a story to a dear friend. "Reader, I married him," she read, her voice carrying all the passion and determination of Jane Eyre. But instead of continuing with Charlotte Bronte's words, Emily found herself improvising, letting her own romantic imagination guide the words. "There was a hunger in him that mirrored my own," she continued, her voice growing more intimate in the stillness of the night. "A need that transcended words, that pulsed in the space between us like a beating heart. He fought against it, I knew. He built walls around his feelings, as if they were enemies to be contained." Emily lost herself in the words, letting them flow naturally as the candle flame danced and created seductive shadows across her face. She didn't notice the figure that silently materialized in the entrance of the room, hidden in the shadows of the corridor. "But some things can't be denied forever," she murmured, turning an imaginary page. "Some hungers only grow stronger when starved, and I knew that sooner or later the walls he had built would crumble, and then—" She paused, biting her lower lip slightly as she searched for the right words. The candlelight caressed her neck, trailing down the delicate line of her collarbone to where the fabric of her nightgown met her skin. "And then he would come to me," she continued, her voice almost a whisper. "Not with kind words or romantic promises, but with the raw honesty of desire. His hands would touch me as if I were something precious and dangerous at the same time, as if he knew that once he possessed me completely, he would never be the same man." Emily closed her eyes, letting herself be carried away by the fantasy she was creating. He would take me in his arms, and I would feel the contained strength in his body, the passion he so desperately fought to hide. And when our lips met, a barely perceptible sound, perhaps just the house settling, perhaps something else, made her eyes snap open suddenly. Emily glanced around the room, her heart racing. For a moment she was certain she wasn't alone, that someone had been there listening to every word that had left her lips. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling slightly. Only silence answered, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on her, that her intimate words had found ears that shouldn't have been there. The skin on her arms prickled, not from the cold, but from an acute awareness of her own vulnerability, and of something more dangerous: excitement. If Cole had been there, if he had heard her fantasies spoken aloud, what would he think? What would he feel? The idea that he might have witnessed this intimate moment sent waves of heat through her body, mixed with mortification and a strange anticipation. Emily remained still for several minutes, all her senses alert, but no further sound came from the depths of the house. Gradually, she relaxed, convincing herself it had only been her overactive imagination. But when she finally closed the book and stood to return to her room, she couldn't ignore the persistent feeling that something had changed in the atmosphere of the house. As if her words had released something into the air, something now hanging between the walls like an unspoken promise. As she climbed the stairs, taking the candle with her, Emily didn't know that in the minutes to come, a man would lie awake in his bed on the other side of the house, tormented by the words he had heard, battling desires he refused to acknowledge, and losing that battle a little more with each beat of his quickened heart. The night was far from over, and the walls Cole Maddox had built around his heart were beginning to develop the first dangerous cracks. Cole had woken up thirsty. That's what he told himself as he got out of bed and silently walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. It had nothing to do with the restlessness that kept him awake, nor with how the sheets seemed too warm against his skin, nor with the thoughts of the woman sleeping in the room that used to be his. But when he reached the end of the hallway and saw the golden light filtering from the living room, Cole stopped as though he'd hit an invisible wall. Someone was awake. Emily. His first instinct was to turn back, walk away and return to his room, pretend he hadn't seen anything. But something in the soft quality of the light, in the almost sacred stillness of the scene, made him hesitate. And then he heard her voice. Cole moved like a ghost to the entrance of the room, staying hidden in the shadows where he could observe without being seen. What he witnessed made his world stop spinning on its axis. Emily was curled up on the sofa, bathed in the golden candlelight like a vision from a dream. The white cotton nightgown clung to her curves in an innocent yet provocative way, and her red hair fell like liquid silk over one bare shoulder. But it wasn't just her beauty that held him there frozen, it was her voice. She was reading, but the words coming from her lips weren't from any book he recognized. They were intimate, sensual, full of passion that she was creating right there, crafting a story that seemed drawn directly from her own secret desires. There was a hunger in him that mirrored my own, she said, and Cole felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. How did she know? How could she speak of hunger when it was exactly what he felt? A gnawing, uncontrollable hunger that grew with every second he spent in her presence. Cole gripped the doorframe, his fingers white from the strength of his hold. He should leave. Now. Before it went too far, before he lost the control he had fought so hard to maintain. But instead, he found himself being pulled closer by her words, like a thirsty man being led to an oasis. Each sentence Emily uttered seemed to have been designed specifically to dismantle his defenses, to find the cracks in his armor and widen them until everything crumbled. His hands would touch me as if I were something precious and dangerous at the same time, she murmured. And Cole closed his eyes, involuntarily imagining what it would be like to touch that creamy skin that seemed to glow in the candlelight. His hands balled into fists by his sides, fighting the impulse to cross the room and make her words a reality. The worst part was that she was right. He would touch her exactly like that, with reverence and urgency, as if she were both his salvation and his ruin. Because that's what Emily represented to him, pure danger wrapped in deceptively innocent packaging. Cole forced himself to open his eyes and truly look at her, really absorb the vision that she was unwittingly offering. The nightgown had slid slightly, revealing more of the delicate curve of her shoulders. Her lips moved slowly as she spoke, and he found himself hypnotized by the movement, imagining what it would be like to silence them with his own. "And when our lips met," she continued, and it was that sentence that broke Cole's last resistance. Desire hit him like a bolt of lightning, coursing through his veins like liquid fire. It wasn't just physical attraction, though God knew he wanted her with an intensity that bordered on pain. It was something much more dangerous, the need to possess her completely, to make all those romantic fantasies she whispered in the dark come true. Cole took a step toward the room before forcing himself to stop. No, he couldn't do this. There were rules, agreements, boundaries he had set for good reasons. Emily was young, innocent. She deserved more than a man who had forgotten how to love properly. She deserved romance and gentleness, not the brutal hunger that burned inside him. But as she continued speaking, painting images of passion and desire with her words, Cole felt his resolve disintegrate like sand slipping through his fingers. Every word was a caress, every pause a promise, every sigh an invitation that he was desperately fighting to reject. "He would take me in his arms," Emily whispered, and Cole almost groaned aloud. His muscles clenched with the need to do exactly that, to cross the few meters separating them, scoop her off the sofa, and show her that her fantasies were pale compared to the reality of what lay between them. It was then that Emily paused and looked around, that Cole finally managed to move. The near discovery moment was like a cold shower, reminding him of the danger of what he was doing, for both of them. He silently retreated, each step a battle against the instinct that screamed for him to do the opposite. When he finally reached his room and closed the door behind him, Cole leaned against the solid wood, his breath heavy and erratic. But there was no escape. Even there, isolated and safe, Emily's words echoed in his mind like a seductive melody. Some hungers can't be denied forever. She was right, and that truth terrified him. Cole walked to the window and rested his hands on the sill, gazing out at the moonlit fields stretching to the horizon. This land was his life, his purpose, everything that mattered. He had built an empire here through hard work and determination, keeping emotions at bay because they only complicated things. But Emily was a complication he hadn't expected. She was like a storm forming on the horizon, beautiful, powerful, and utterly destructive to anything in its path. Cole closed his eyes and tried to summon the discipline that had served him so well over the years. He tried to remember the reasons he had set those rules, why it was better to keep his distance, but all he could see was Emily bathed in that golden light, her words of passion still whispering in his ears, like a promise of what could be, if only he had the courage to reach out and take. The battle was far from over, and Cole was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, he had already lost before it even began. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh cornbread woke Cole before the sun had fully risen. For a moment, he lay still in bed, disoriented. Rosa didn't come on Sundays, and he was accustomed to quiet mornings broken only by the distant sound of cattle and the whistle of the wind through the fields. But then he remembered Emily. Cole quickly got up, dressed in a clean shirt and work pants, trying to ignore the strange anticipation bubbling in his chest. The last thing he expected was to find his convenience wife preparing breakfast as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When he entered the kitchen, he stopped abruptly at the threshold. Emily was facing away from him, wearing a simple light blue cotton dress that hugged her waist and moved gracefully as she worked at the stove. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, with a few rebellious strands framing her face, and she was humming a melody he didn't recognize. The table was already set for two, with dishes he hadn't seen since his mother was alive, carefully folded cloth napkins, and even a small vase with wildflowers she must have picked from the neglected garden beside the house. "Good morning," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Emily turned, and the smile that lit up her face was like a punch to the stomach. It was genuine, warm, with no trace of the tension from the previous night. "Good morning, Cole. I hope you don't mind. I woke up early and thought, well, I thought it would be nice to start the day properly." There was something in the word start that made something contract in his chest, as if they were a team, a real couple, beginning their life together. "How you didn't have to," he murmured, but his eyes were already cataloguing everything she had prepared. Scrambled eggs still steaming, thick slices of perfectly golden bacon, cornbread that smelled like heaven, and coffee with a richer aroma than anything he could make. "I know," Emily said, turning back to the stove to flip the bacon, "but I wanted to." Cole moved closer slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might run away if he moved too quickly. "It smells amazing." Emily smiled over her shoulder. "My mother always said a man works better with a full stomach, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you today, I imagine." "There's always work," he agreed, watching fascinated as she moved around the kitchen with natural efficiency, as if she had always belonged there. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the table with a graceful wave of her hand. "It's almost ready." Cole hesitated. "Can I help with anything?" Emily paused, the spatula suspended in the air, and turned to look at him fully. There was surprise in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected him to offer. "You would like to help?" The simple question carried much more weight than it should have. Cole realized he was in unfamiliar territory, not just with Emily, but with the whole idea of sharing his space, his mornings, his life. He felt stupidly lost. "I'm not much good in the kitchen." Emily's smile softened, becoming almost tender. "You don't have to be. Could you just stay here with me?" The whispered question made something ache in Cole's chest. When was the last time anyone had simply asked for his company? Not his work, not his strength, not his ability to solve problems. Just him. "Of course," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Cole leaned against the counter next to her, keeping enough distance not to touch her, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. She smelled like clean soap and something subtly floral that made his head spin. "Do you always wake up this early?" she asked, cracking eggs into a bowl with precise movements. "Yeah, the animals don't respect human schedules." Emily laughed, a melodious sound that made something relax in Cole's shoulders. I imagine not. In the city, the only animal that woke me up early was Mrs. Peterson upstairs, dragging furniture at 5 in the morning. Why did she do that? I never found out. I think she was just lonely. Made noise to feel less alone, maybe. There was something in the way she said lonely that made Cole look at her more closely. Emily was focused on the breakfast, but he caught a shadow passing over her face. Did you feel lonely? In the city, Emily paused in the middle of stirring the eggs. Sometimes, loneliness is strange in crowded places. You can be surrounded by hundreds of people and still feel completely invisible. Cole knew exactly that feeling, although his loneliness was geographic, miles and miles of land with no soul in sight. And here, he asked, his voice softer, do you feel lonely here? Emily turned to look at him, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. There was honesty in those green eyes, a vulnerability that made Cole want to promise things he wasn't sure he could keep. I don't know yet, she finally said. Ask me again in a few days. The honest answer disarmed him completely. He had expected something safer, more polite. Instead, she had given him raw truth. The eggs, he murmured, nodding toward the skillet. Oh. Emily quickly turned, saving the breakfast before it burned. I almost ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything, Cole said, and the words carried more meaning than the breakfast. They worked in comfortable silence for the next few minutes, Emily placing the food on plates while Cole poured coffee into 2 mugs. When they finally sat at the table, the atmosphere was different from the night before, lighter but somehow more intimate. Tell me about the farm, Emily said, cutting into the cornbread delicately. How did you get all of this? Cole chewed slowly, organizing his thoughts. It was a story he rarely told, but something in Emily's genuine attention made him want to share. My father started with 50 acres, worked from sunup to sundown, saved every penny. When he died, he left everything to me, along with a debt I spent 10 years paying off. Must have been hard, Emily said softly. It was. Cole took a sip of the coffee, surprised by how good it was. There were days I thought about quitting, selling everything and moving to the city. What made you stay? Cole looked out the window at the fields stretching to the horizon. This land, it gets in your blood. It becomes part of who you are. I couldn't imagine being anything but a farmer. Emily nodded as if she understood perfectly. It's like being in love, I imagine. The comparison caught him off guard. Maybe it is. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was a different silence, comfortable rather than tense. Cole found himself watching the way Emily ate, small, delicate bites, the way she wiped her lips with the napkin, the way her eyes lit up when she tasted something she liked. This is delicious, he said finally. The smile Emily gave him in response was radiant. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. And Cole realized with a jolt of panic that he liked much more than just the food. He liked having her there, her smiles, her questions, the way she was turning his austere house into something that felt like home, which was incredibly dangerous for a man who had sworn to keep his distance. 2 hours after breakfast, Cole was in his office preparing for the monthly meeting with other farmers in the region. It was an important meeting. They would discuss cattle prices, pasture conditions, and the rumors about the railroad's arrival in the county. He needed to be presentable, professional, completely in control of himself. But his hands trembled slightly as he tried to button the vest over his starched white shirt. The morning with Emily had left his nerves on constant alert, as if every cell in his body were tuned to her frequency. He could still hear the echo of her laughter, smell the lavender scent that had wafted from her hair when she leaned over the table to refill his coffee. Cole looked at himself in the small mirror hung on the office wall and frowned. His tie was crooked, the collar of his shirt half folded, and there was a coffee stain he didn't remember making. He looked like a man who had lost control of his life in less than 24 hours. Damn, he muttered, trying to straighten the tie for the 3rd time. Cole. Emily's soft voice came from the hallway. Mr. Hartwell and Mr. Morrison have arrived. They're waiting on the porch. I'll be right there, he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. He tried again to fix the collar, but his large hands, accustomed to hard work, seemed incapable of dealing with something so delicate. Light footsteps approached in the hallway, announcing Emily's arrival. Cole turned when she appeared at the door, and again he felt that punch in his stomach. She had changed out of her morning dress into a brown cotton one with small mother-of-pearl buttons, and her hair was tied more formally, revealing the elegant line of her neck. "Do you need help?" she asked, her eyes immediately noticing his struggle with the clothes. Cole hesitated. Accepting her help would mean allowing her to get closer, to touch him, to invade the personal space he had desperately tried to maintain. "I'm fine," he said, but his hands betrayed the words as they failed once again with the collar. Emily stepped into the office, a gentle smile curving her lips. "Cole, you're going to be late, and from the nerves in your voice, I imagine this meeting is important." She was right, of course. She always seemed to be right about things that concerned him, as if she could read through his defenses with irritating ease. "It's important," he admitted reluctantly. "Then let me help." This time it wasn't a question, but a soft yet firm statement. Before Cole could protest, Emily crossed the small space between them. The world seemed to shrink until only the few inches that separated them remained. She was smaller than he had realized, the top of her head barely reaching his chin. And when she raised her hands to his collar, Cole had to fight the impulse to step back. "Stay still," she murmured, her full concentration focused on the task. But Cole couldn't stay still. Not when he could feel the heat of her body radiating through the layers of fabric between them. Not when her scent, lavender mixed with something purely Emily, filled his lungs with every breath. Not when her delicate fingers occasionally brushed the skin of his neck, sending waves of electricity through his nervous system. "Your friends must be wondering where you are," Emily said, her words coming in a soft whisper as she worked on the stubborn collar. "Probably," Cole agreed, his own voice coming out rougher than he intended. "What's the meeting about?" Emily asked casually, but Cole could feel the tension rising between them like a rope being stretched to the breaking point. "Farm business. Prices? Strategies for next year?" He tried to focus on the words, but it was impossible when she was so close, when he could see the small golden freckles scattered across her nose, when her lips were just inches from his. Emily murmured, moving slightly to adjust the tie. The movement made her body brush against his for just a second, but it was enough to make Cole close his eyes and clench his fists by his sides. "All done?" she said finally, smoothing the fabric with slow, deliberate movements. "Now you look like a man who can conquer the world." But Emily didn't immediately step away. Instead, her hand stayed on his chest, on the fabric of his shirt, and when Cole opened his eyes, he found her looking directly at him. There was something in her green eyes, a knowing, a perception of the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. "Emily," he said, his voice a low warning. "Yes," she whispered, but didn't move. If anything, it seemed she leaned slightly toward him. For a moment that lasted an eternity, they simply stared at each other. Cole could see his own reflection in her eyes, feel her soft breath against his skin, count every dark lash that framed those hypnotic green eyes. The outside world disappeared. There was no meeting, no farmers waiting, no rules or agreements or reasons why this was a terrible idea. There was only Emily, so close he could feel the warmth of her body, so beautiful it made his head spin, so dangerous to his peace of mind that he should have run. Instead, Cole found himself leaning toward her, drawn by a force stronger than his will, more powerful than his determination to keep his distance. "Cole!" Jim Hartwell's voice from the porch broke the spell like a bucket of cold water. "Are you coming or not?" Reality fell on Cole like an avalanche. He pulled away from Emily so quickly he almost stumbled, putting the table between them like a physical barrier. I need to go," he said, his breath uneven. Emily blinked a few times, as if she too had just come out of a trance. Her cheeks were flushed and she raised a hand to her neck in an unconscious gesture. "Of course," she murmured. "I don't want you to be late because of me." But there was something in her voice, a soft and satisfied quality, that made Cole suspect she knew exactly the effect she had on him, and worse yet, that it had been intentional. Cole grabbed his hat from the table and quickly walked toward the door, desperate to escape before he did something they would both regret. "Cole," Emily said when he reached the door, and he forced himself to stop and look back. "Good luck at the meeting." There was a small, mysterious smile on her lips, and Cole had the uncomfortable feeling that she had just won a battle he hadn't even realized he was fighting. As he stepped out to meet the other farmers, Cole couldn't shake the memory of Emily's soft touch on his skin, or the way she had looked at him, as if she could see straight through all the defenses he had so carefully built. The rules he had established on the first day seemed more fragile with every passing moment, and Cole was beginning to realize that Emily was far more dangerous than he had imagined, not because she was calculating or manipulative, but because she was genuine, caring, and absolutely irresistible, and he was losing the battle against himself, one gentle touch at a time. Cole returned home at 2 in the morning, his body exhausted from the meeting that had stretched far beyond the planned time, and his mind even more tired from the constant battle against thoughts of Emily. The discussion about cattle prices had been mere background noise to the memories he couldn't erase. The soft touch of her fingers on his neck, the way she had looked at him, the feeling that he was losing a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. The house was enveloped in silence when he entered, only the distant ticking of the old clock marking the passage of time. Cole removed his boots at the entrance, trying not to make noise so as not to wake Emily. The last thing he needed was another encounter with her when his defenses were so low. But as he passed by the living room, he saw that familiar golden light filtering through the space. His heart raced. Emily was awake again, reading by candlelight. Cole stopped in the hallway, fighting the same internal battle as the night before. He should go straight to his room, pretend he hadn't seen anything, keep the safe distance he had established. But his legs seemed to have a mind of their own, and he found himself walking silently toward the entrance of the room. The scene he encountered was even more devastating than the night before. Emily was curled up on the couch, wearing the same white cotton nightgown, but this time there was something different in her posture. She seemed more relaxed, more expectant, as if she knew he was coming. "This hunger you mentioned," she was reading aloud, her voice more sultry and intentionally provocative, "is like a river that's been dammed for too long. It may seem controlled, contained, but the pressure builds with every passing day, every hour, until there's no choice but to let it flow free." Cole closed his eyes, clenching his fists. She was doing this on purpose. She had to be. No one chose words like that by accident. No one read with that intimate tone without intention. "When he finally comes to me," Emily continued, her voice almost a whisper, "there's no fake gentleness, no empty words. There's only raw honesty. His hands reach for me as if I'm both his salvation and his ruin." It was at that moment that Cole completely lost the battle with himself. He took a step into the room, then another, his steps silent but determined. Emily didn't look up immediately, but he saw her fingers tremble slightly on the pages of the book, saw her breath quicken almost imperceptibly. She knew he was there. She knew, and she kept reading. "Emily," he said, his voice low and dangerous. She slowly lifted her eyes, and what Cole saw in those green depths almost took his breath away. There was no surprise, no fear. There was only expectation, desire, a complete awareness of what was about to happen. "Cole," she said softly, closing the book and placing it beside her. "How was the meeting?" The casual question, asked as if they weren't about to cross a line from which there would be no return, almost made him smile. Almost. "Don't play games with me," he said, taking another step toward her. "You know exactly why I'm here." Emily tilted her head slightly, her red hair falling over one shoulder. "I do? You've been doing this on purpose. The readings, the words you choose, the way you look at me." His voice was becoming rougher with every word. "You're provoking me." "And what if I am?" she asked, standing gracefully from the couch. The nightgown flowed around her body, and Cole had to fight the urge to close the distance between them immediately. "Then you have no idea what you're stirring," he said, his voice a low warning. Emily took a step toward him, closing the space between them. "Maybe I know exactly what I'm doing." "Emily," his name came out as a strangled groan. "You said you needed a wife," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But you didn't say what kind of wife you wanted." "I said we'd keep things practical." "And what if I don't want them to be practical?" The question came out as a whisper, but it carried the weight of a confession. "What if I want more?" Cole felt his last defenses disintegrate like sandcastles before a wave. "You don't understand what you're asking. Then show me. The two simple words were his complete undoing. Cole crossed the distance between them in two long strides, his hands finding her face and pulling her up toward his lips. The book she had still been holding fell to the floor with a soft thud, completely forgotten. The kiss was anything but gentle. It was raw hunger, months of loneliness and denial pouring out between them like a dam finally breaking. Cole could feel Emily melt against him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had begun spinning out of control. "Emily," he murmured against her lips, and there was worship and desperation in equal measure in his voice. "Don't stop," she whispered back. "Please, don't stop." Cole had no intention of stopping. He couldn't, even if he wanted to. His arms closed around her, lifting her off the ground and holding her against his chest as if she might disappear if he let her go. Emily wrapped her legs around his waist, and Cole groaned at the feeling of having her so close, so completely his. "Your room," he said against the smooth skin of her neck. "Our room," she corrected, and the words sent a wave of heat through him that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with belonging. Cole carried her up the stairs, his lips never leaving her skin, his hands exploring every curve he could reach. Emily whispered things against his ear, words of encouragement, of desire, of promises that made his head spin. When they reached the room, Cole gently set her down beside the bed, his hands trembling slightly as he touched her face, as if she were made of something precious and fragile. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving her one last chance to back away. "After this, there's no turning back." Emily smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "Cole Maddox, I came to Texas to be your wife. Let me be your wife for real." "Mine," he said, and there was fierce possessiveness in his voice. "You are mine." "Yours," she agreed, and then there were no more words. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in soft silver, as Cole showed Emily exactly what kind of hunger he had been containing. And when she cried his name in the dark, when their bodies finally united in the world's oldest dance, Cole knew he had lost far more than just the battle against desire. He had lost his heart, completely and irrevocably, to the woman who had turned his house into a home, and his lonely nights into something he would never want to forget. The first golden ray of sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in amber and honey tones. Emily slowly awoke, enveloped in a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. Cole's strong arm was around her waist, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest, and she could feel his steady, regular breathing against her neck. For a moment, she stayed perfectly still, absorbing the reality of what had happened between them. There was no regret, only a deep satisfaction that emanated from every fiber of her being. She had bet everything the night before, her dignity, her pride, her safety, and in return, she had gained something far more valuable. Cole moved behind her, his arms tightening slightly around her body before his eyes opened. Emily felt the exact moment he became fully awake, the moment when the reality of what they had shared settled in his mind. "Emily," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep and something deeper. "Good morning," she whispered, slowly turning in his arms to look at him. What she saw in his grey eyes made her heart race. There was no regret there, no coldness from the previous days. Instead, there was raw vulnerability, a tenderness that made tears well in her eyes. Cole lifted a hand to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek with almost religious reverence. "Are you okay?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "More than okay," she answered honestly. "I'm happy." Something passed over Cole's face. Surprise, perhaps, as if happiness was a strange concept to him. "Happy," he repeated, as if testing the word. "And you?" Emily asked suddenly, feeling insecure. "Do you regret it?" The question made Cole prop himself up on his elbow, looking at her with complete intensity. "Regret it? Emily, He stopped, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily to him. Emily waited, her heart pounding like a drum as she watched the internal struggle unfold on his face. There was so much at stake in this moment. Everything about their future depended on what he would say next. "I never knew I could feel like this," he finally said, his voice low and intense. "I never knew I could want someone so much it hurt." "Cole," she began, but he silenced her with a gentle touch of his fingers to her lips. "Let me finish," he said. "I need to say this now while I have the courage." Emily nodded, barely daring to breathe. Cole sat up in the bed, running a hand through his disheveled hair before looking at her again. "When you arrived here, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. A practical wife, a convenient arrangement, nothing more. I had built my whole life around control, discipline, keeping emotions out of the equation. And now?" Emily asked softly. "Now you've turned my world upside down," he said, a sad smile curving his lips. "You came here with your books and your smiles and your way of turning a house into a home. And suddenly all the rules I had set seemed ridiculous." Emily sat up too, pulling the sheet around her body but maintaining eye contact with him. "I don't want you to change who you are, Cole. I just want to be a part of who you are." "That's the problem," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You already are a part of who I am. You've infiltrated my life so completely I can't remember what it was like before you came." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" Cole took her hands, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I'm saying I'm in love with you, Emily. Completely, irrevocably in love." The words hung in the air between them like a sacred promise. Emily felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of pure joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "From the moment I stepped down from that wagon and you looked at me with those intimidating gray eyes, I knew you would be my ruin or my salvation." "Salvation," Cole said with certainty. "Definitely salvation." He pulled her closer, and Emily nestled against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "I want you to be my real wife," he said against her hair. "Not just on paper, not just for convenience. I want children with you, Emily. I want to grow old with you. I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life knowing that you're here, that you belong to me as much as I belong to you." Emily lifted her face to look at him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Are you sure? This is a big change from your original plans." Cole laughed, and it was a rich, genuine sound she had never heard from him before. "My original plans didn't include falling in love with a woman who reads romantic stories by candlelight and makes the best breakfast in Texas. And they didn't include a wife who's going to want changes in the house decor," Emily teased. "You can change anything you want," he said, his voice serious again. "This house, this life, it's all yours as much as it's mine now." Emily felt her heart overflow with emotion. "There's only one thing I need you to promise me. Anything. Promise me you'll love me forever," she said, echoing the words she had spoken the night before in her improvised fantasy. "No matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, promise you'll always come back home to me." Cole took her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that made her world stop spinning. "I promise to love you forever, Emily Maddox," he said, her last name on his lips, sending shivers of pleasure down her spine. "I promise that no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, my heart will always be here with you. You are my home now. And you are mine," she replied, before sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of eternal love and second beginnings. Outside, the sun continued its rise over the golden fields of Texas, but inside the room, two hearts that had found their other half began to plan a future that would be far more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream alone. The practical arrangement had turned into something much more precious, a true love that would last forever. 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything between them, and Emily could hardly recognize the man Cole had become. Where there had once been calculated coldness, there was now warmth and tenderness. Where there had once been tense silences, there were now conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. And where there had once been careful distance, there was now an intimacy that grew deeper with each passing day. The house had transformed as well. The bare walls now displayed small watercolors Emily had painted of the fields at sunset. Soft linen curtains filtered the harsh Texas light, creating a more welcoming atmosphere. Wildflowers appeared regularly in makeshift vases, and the smell of homemade cakes often competed with the persistent aroma of coffee. On this particular evening, Emily was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she felt familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind. Cole had returned from the fields earlier than usual, and she could feel the heat of his body through the green cotton dress she wore. "I came home early," he murmured against her neck, his words sending familiar shivers down her spine. "I noticed," Emily said, leaning back against him as she continued stirring the stew. "Any special reason?" "I missed my wife," he said, and there was something in the way he said "my wife" that made her heart race, not anymore as a technical description, but as a loving declaration of possession. Emily turned in his arms, immediately noticing the special sparkle in his grey eyes. "Miss me? You saw me at breakfast just 8 hours ago." "8 hours too many," he said, leaning in to kiss the tip of her nose. "Besides, I had an idea." "Oh?" Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the mischievous tone in his voice. "What kind of idea?" Instead of answering immediately, Cole stepped back and pulled something from behind his back, a book Emily immediately recognized. It was the same Jane Eyre that had been read aloud that first night, the night when he had listened without her knowing. "I thought maybe," he said, a small but devastating smile curving his lips, "you could read to me tonight, like you used to." The simple request carried layers of meaning that made Emily's stomach tighten in anticipation. She knew exactly what he was asking for, and it had nothing to do with literature. "I'd like that," she said, her voice coming out softer than she had intended. "Good," Cole murmured, his eyes never leaving her face, "because I have some specific requests about how I'd like the reading to happen." Emily felt warmth spreading through her body. "Specific requests?" He said, moving closer again until there was no space between them. "For example, I'd like you to wear that white nightgown, the cotton one with the small buttons." "Cole Maddox," Emily said, feigning scandal. "What kind of man have you become?" "The kind who is completely in love with his wife," he answered without hesitation, "and who isn't ashamed to admit it anymore." The direct confession made something melt in Emily's chest. Even after 3 weeks, it still surprised her how Cole had transformed from a man who fought against every emotion into someone who expressed them with devastating honesty. "And if I have more specific requests of my own?" she asked, playfully working on the buttons of his shirt. "Like what?" His voice was becoming rougher. "Like, maybe I don't want to wear the nightgown for too long." Cole's eyes darkened in a way she had learned to recognize and anticipate. "Emily," he said, his voice a low warning. "Yes?" she said innocently, but her hands were already working on the first button of his shirt. "The dinner," he reminded weakly. "That can wait," she said, undoing another button. "Some things are more important than food." Cole laughed, a rich and genuine sound. "You're corrupting me, Mrs. Maddox." "I hope so," she replied, standing on her tiptoes to whisper against his ear. "That's my job as your wife, isn't it?" That was enough to break Cole's last shred of control. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, making her let out a small cry of surprise and delight. "The book," she protested weakly as he carried her toward the stairs. "We'll get it later," he said, his eyes sparkling with promises. "Right now, I have other plans for you." "What kind of plans?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer by the way he looked at her. "The kind that involves showing you exactly how much I love you," he said, climbing the stairs with determination. "Repeatedly." Emily laughed, the sound echoing through the walls of the house that had truly become theirs. "I love you, Cole Maddox." "And I love you, Emily Maddox," he responded, pausing at the top of the stairs to kiss her with a passion that hadn't faded since that first night. Forever. When they reached the room, the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the curtains, bathing everything in a magical light. Cole gently set her down beside the bed, his hands already working on the buttons of her dress with a skill he had perfected in the last few weeks. "The book can wait," Emily murmured against his lips as the dress slid to the floor. "But you can't." "I don't plan to," he promised, and then there were no more words. Outside, the stars began to appear in the endless Texas sky, silently witnessing the love that had blossomed between a farmer who thought he had forgotten how to love and a woman who had taught him that some things were worth more than all the land in the world. Inside the room, Cole and Emily created their own constellation of whispered promises and loving caresses, knowing they had found something that would last far beyond the seasons to come. They had started as strangers bound by necessity, but had become lovers bound by choice, partners bound by passion, and soulmates bound by a love that was as vast and enduring as the Texas land itself. And when they finally fell asleep, entwined in each other's arms, they both knew that this was only the beginning of a love story that would unfold in every morning and night to come, each one sweeter than the last, each one a new page in the book of their intertwined lives forever. Sometimes, the greatest transformations begin with the smallest gestures: a simple suitcase, a carefully prepared breakfast, a gentle touch, adjusting a collar. Cole had built walls around his heart, thinking they would protect him, but he discovered that some people don't need to tear down barriers. They simply walk through them with love. Emily didn't just win a husband. She awakened a man who didn't even know he was asleep. And perhaps that's the true magic of love. It doesn't change us. It reveals who we've always been beneath the fear. Could there be someone out there waiting to awaken the best version of you? If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know. Where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing stories like this.